Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. It's lovely to have so many of you with us already, as we're nearly midway through June, and today's discussion moves towards AI. To those who don't know me, and I've not met before, so my name is Matt Baird. I've been recruiting in social housing now for 11 years, and it's that recruitment business which keeps this running and keeps this free and open to all every week. If you are looking for any support, please do reach out. I'm also co-chair of the board for Spring Housing, which are a housing provider in Birmingham that supports young homeless people, refugees across Birmingham and Warwickshire. And I'm like I say, the founder and host of the Social Housing Roundtable, which you're all here for today. So this was founded during lockdown as a place just for people to come together and discuss many different things in the housing space, initially with about 4 or 5 of us in the room, and has now grown to this incredible community that you see before you. There's nearly 900 of us on the mailing list. But more importantly, there's many people who sometimes just watch the recordings or who follow up in various other means and engage with the various discussions we've had. So if you are new to the roundtable, please do go check out an incredible back catalogue of about 120 episodes that are all available on YouTube and Spotify. So on to today. Delighted, as many of you know, this year, as if it's as if we ever take a break. This season of the Social Housing Roundtable is being sponsored by Alertacall, and Alertacall are joining us today through James Batchelor to discuss AI. The many discussions that we're going to have around it are going to be really, really interesting. I think when you're looking at AI as a particular subject, you also need to hopefully get someone who has their finger on the pulse with exactly what's going on. So I'm delighted we're also joined today by Rob Pickering, who I'll get to introduce shortly. But Rob is somebody who's worked in tech for many years, is an ex-tech CEO, and is currently in the middle of a startup, which is all discussing AI. But again, I'll get him to introduce shortly. But I'm going to pass across to James first. So James is the founder of Alertacall, has been involved in the tech industry for many, many years. I know a few of you may have heard him speak before, but it's all about kind of innovation and customer delivery. So is someone I've built a really good relationship with, is delighted to have with us today. So without further ado, James, I'll pass over to you to kick off today's discussion into AI.
Well, thank you for that, Matt. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all okay. Where did Monday go is what I'm feeling at the moment. I can't believe we're on Tuesday already. So I'm James. As Matt mentioned, I'm the founder of an organisation called Alertacall. And essentially, we develop clever ways to help you keep in contact with your customers. So we do that through 3 ways. There's some connections to AI here, which is why I'm just mentioning it. First and foremost, we have a touch screen with all sorts of cool features on around digital engagement, surveying your customers, messaging your customers, and engaging with them. We also have environmental sensors that connect to that touchscreen to prevent damp and mold. And we use AIs in that to help predict changes in patterns within people's homes that might infer a problem. We also have a clever way to have daily contact with your customers through this thing called OK each day. And I'll give you some examples later about how we use AI in that because they're relevant to your own business. And we have a range of other products and services that can also help with older people in other settings as well. But really what we're about is kind of inventing and innovating and trying to improve the lives of older and vulnerable people living in your properties. So what on earth has this got to do with AI and artificial intelligence? Well, as I alluded to, many of our own products and services are using AIs. So, for example, when somebody presses our OK each day button to confirm everything's okay to property, or we have to call them, we track all those engagements and use AIs to try and infer or detect where something might not be quite right. Now, we'll get into what AI really is in a few minutes just to provide an overview, but I'd be interested, and I'll just change the view of my Zoom screen, about how many of you would consider yourselves to actually technologists. So how many of you consider yourself technologists? If you could kind of have a bit of a raise of hands or a bit of a wave or whatever, that'd be interesting. Oh, okay. So I'm just asking the question because it'll help me work out where we pitch this conversation at. So there's a few knocking about, which is good. So we'll concentrate then today mainly on some of the applications of AI and we'll come up with 2 or 3 ideas about how it could help you as social housing providers. But before we get into that, I have a guilty secret, and it was that actually I've been interested in this whole area since I was a little boy. Now I'm going to share a slide. Don't worry, not of me as a young child. That would be just plain weird. But I'll take you through a bit of a journey about how I got into this space. So hold on. So hopefully you guys can see me there grasping my very old ZX Spectrum computer back from the 1980s with the little rubber keys. Matt, can you give me a thumbs up? Can you see that? Because you're very prominent on my screen. That's brilliant. Now, look, one of the many games I played when I was a child computer enthusiast, one of them was called The Hobbit, obviously based upon Tolkien's extremely famous book. And you could navigate your way through that world by typing in commands on the screen, so it might be Gandalf cast a spell for me, or go north, or wait, or look inside the treasure chest. And it was a very early example of what probably now we would call a chatbot, in the rudimentary technology was being used to help you navigate around a virtual environment. I absolutely loved that game, and I know it seems like nothing right now. It was actually clearly a very big deal to have games like that back in the 1980s. So another thing that absolutely fascinated me was a piece of software called Eliza. Now, Eliza is probably the great grandmother of Chat GPT as we know it now. So the premise of Eliza is that you could ask Eliza a question, and she proposed to be a therapist or a counselor, and Eliza, using a series of clever algorithms, would engage you in conversation. Is something troubling you? Is something that you'd like to talk about? Those are the kind of questions. And actually, it was very, very effective at the time and quite magical. And it actually fooled many people in blind tests into believing it was a real person at the other end. So we're talking about something from a very long time ago. And in fact, Eliza was first developed all the way back in 1966. So it shows you how long this idea of using AIs to converse with humans has been about. So, like I say, these are very, very early forms of AIs, what we actually call natural language processors. But in truth, there's lots of different kinds of AIs and lots of different kinds of technologies that are used to create them. So we'll steer clear of the 20 different kinds of AIs that exist and keep it in practical terms. So what really is AI for the purposes of a conversation like this? Well, it's a machine or a piece of software that can simulate human intelligence and problem solving capabilities. So I've put a list up on the screen, but obviously this includes coming up with ideas, creating new documents, consolidating information, holding conversations, generating new artworks, text and music, checking work for errors, finding unusual patterns in data, and quite a bit of what I'm going to talk about today is going to be about that. And also, believe it or not, writing software. Now, they're all what's called narrow AIs. So those kind of capabilities have a narrow field of use, don't they? But probably the ones that you've seen most in science fiction movies and futurology are what we call artificial general intelligence. And as a keen science fiction fan myself, here we are, 3 films that have incredibly famous, well, certainly very famous for 2 of them, depictions of what are called AGIs. So an AGI is really an artificial intelligence that combines all those narrow AIs into something that begins to exceed, in some respects, the capabilities of humans. This is the bit where the robots come and try and take over the world. Now, I was reflecting, putting this slide together this morning, that it is funny how actually most of the big famous movies and stories around AIs are always a bit sinister, aren't they? There's always a sinister theme to them, but it doesn't need to be that way. By the way, for those who have not the faintest idea what the image on the right is, that's from Arthur C. Clarke's 2001: A Space Odyssey, and that was their AI called HAL. What I find is that pretty much everybody over 45 has some idea what that is, and the younger people are below that, the less likely they are to have seen that movie. Now, most of the AIs that you're hearing about at the moment, including ChatGPT, are based around a thing called machine learning. They have this thing called machine learning at their heart. And machine learning is when software looks at patterns and anomalies. This is a slight overstatement in huge sets of data. And there's a great example from the medical world of this. So in the healthcare world, software has been given access to tens of thousands, well, 42,000 in this study, and this was a piece of work that was done with Google, scans of people's lungs, CT scans, to try and see if they could be trained to detect what might be lung cancer or the start of lung cancer in some way. So this piece of software was presented with 42,000 scans. It was trained on basically on some of the tells of what different tumors might look like, and actually became incredibly efficient at picking up what those tumors look like in a very, very short space of time, to the point at which it actually began to exceed humans' capabilities at doing just that very quickly. Now you'll see on the right-hand image, which is a splice of a CT scan, that the anomaly in the green square isn't a tumor, but on the left, it actually is. Now, I think that just gives you an example of how fine-tuned and how fine-grained these machine learning processes can become at detecting the differences. So you might think, well, as a housing provider, what has this got to do with me? But we'll try and think of a comparative solution, a comparative application for this technology. So this ability to look at data and spot anomalies in it, like I say, can be applied to all sorts of different things. And but what is the big AI that everyone's been talking about for the past couple of years? Well, it's GPT, isn't it? And a particular version of that called ChatGPT. And ChatGPT has been trained on literally billions of pages of text, trained on images, trained on other data sets. And really, what it's doing when you ask ChatGPT in this instance to create something for you, it's working out what pictures, what words, what data tends to follow other data. So when you write a particular sentence, if you look across billions of pages, what is the next sentence that will be written? What is the next actual word that might come out probabilistically? And that's really, I'm saying that's all ChatGPT is. The practical applications are much bigger, but basically it's got access to millions, billions of pages of all information. And when you ask it a question, it uses that to consolidate an output and create the most likely output that you would like. Slight oversimplification, but it gives you an idea. Just because I wasn't sure if I'd be able to demonstrate live chat GTP stuff here, which I'm sure the bulk of you've seen anywhere. I very quickly asked it to write me a short song about social housing. And I thought it did a pretty good job, actually. From high-rise towers to streets lined with trees, every brick and beam whispers, come be free. How beautiful. So anyway, in a way, if you think about it, that is what our own brains do, isn't it? That's kind of what I'm doing right now. I'm taking everything that I've learned for the past, 30 plus years working in tech, including my interactions with AIs over the years, and I am speaking now what is my brain thinks is the most likely thing you want to hear based upon all the information that I've consumed over years. So in that respect, ChatGPT probably isn't that different to a stream of human consciousness or a human being relying on its own memories to actually articulate something. Anyway, So how can these capabilities, your organization and your customers, well, benefit from these capabilities? You know, what are the big kind of wins potentially for the social housing sector? Well, we're going to explore just a few areas very quickly because there's only a limited amount of time. Rob's got some cool stuff to show us, but hopefully these will stimulate some conversation when we get into that part of the discussion. So hopefully we're all pretty familiar that ChatGPT can write pretty much anything that you ask it to. Now, it does have limitations and it isn't always perfect. And frankly, most competent writers could probably do better. So for those of you who've played with ChatGPT, you'd have had moments where you've been really impressed by what it's outputted. And I'm sure at other times you'll have really been unimpressed. But here's the thing, that what ChatGPT does have access to is a load more data than you would ever be able to store in your own mind. So where it lacks common sense in terms of outputting sentence structures sometimes, what it does have access to is an awful lot of data. So it's a really, really good starting point. And if it isn't obvious to all of you on this call, and it's a bit contentious what I'm about to say, that if you're about to write a document from scratch and you're lacking inspiration or structure, ChatGPT is a really effective way of getting a document going, right? And I think you don't have to be too resistive to that. This is where the world is at right now. So imagine that you were responsible for writing a bid or a tender and you didn't quite know where to start in terms of structure. It's not crazy to ask ChatGPT to give you a first draft. And actually, there's more and more people using ChatGPT to create tender documents and stuff like that. So in a minute, I'll ask the question, how many of you actually done that? Because I'd be kind of fascinated. In our own place, we've started using it for that. You know, team members that are thinking, where do I start this document? ChatGPT is a good starting point. So, do you know we were looking at scans earlier? You know, we were looking at the lung scans and how it's very easy to train an artificial intelligence on looking for anomalies. Well, I can kind of imagine a version of the future where we're doing that on our housing estates and in our communities. Now, I'm not saying what I'm about to say isn't fraught with complications in terms of potentially moral complications around what is the role of humans, what is the role of AIs, and where is this all going? But can you imagine flying a drone over an estate, right, where photography is automated, that photography is passed through AIs, looking for things like structural problems with roofs and buildings? Yeah, things like that should be relatively easy for AIs to pick up on. Using infrared cameras. And the police have started to do this anyway, for other reasons, looking for excessive heat escape from buildings, right? So you might be able to identify properties that have got very, very poor insulation and heat retention properties. Using AIs and aerial footage, you'll be able to see how many cars there are and how many people there are on the street and infer all sorts of socio-economic issues and kind of get data around where there might be emergent problems, for example, with overparking and areas being too busy. And another interesting application as well is AI should easily be able to spot litter and waste and fly tipping, you know, when it's properly trained. So whilst we're a few years away from it, there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever, you know, that we'll be using AI in estate management in various forms at some point. And local councils will be, and the government will be. Of course, there are lots of questions there about whether we should and we shouldn't, but we'll get into those hopefully in the conversation. So, by the way, just a side thing, not social housing, but there are people already using AIs and satellite photography to do mapping like this. Now, another area that you could use AIs in is preventing risk and preventing undiscovered tenant deaths. So imagine all the data points for your customers, you know, how often you've seen them, how often they've paid their bills, have they made a repairs call? What was the last point of contact with them? Imagine that was all recorded in your CRM, okay? And you had that consolidated view of your data. You'd be able, using AIs, to detect anomalies in people's interactions with you that could confer that there was a problem. So this is from our own OK Each Day service, where we're just using one data point. Have we had contact with somebody each day? And you'll see on this that every dot represents a day. And this is a 4-month sample. And in the last column, you can see that the blue dots are representing, by the way, that people have said that they're actively okaying in their properties. And the vertical axis is the time of day they're doing that. So, but do you see that subtle trend towards the end where people are getting up, this person is getting up later and later and later? The orange dots represent that we're having to call them every day because they're not engaging with us. But you can immediately see a shift in patterns like that can infer that there's a problem with somebody. And you, as a housing provider, have stacks of data sets that could infer that if you consolidated them and used them with AIs. You know, you could actually have a role to play in preventing undiscovered deaths and, you know, ensuring that people are okay. Now, finally, the thing that we're most used to talking about chatbots with and AIs is call center style work and human interactions. This is actually Becca, one of our team members. She's absolutely brilliant on the phones, extremely friendly. But the reality is that chatbots will start to replace human interactions in certain areas. You know, they're getting really very, very sophisticated. And actually, I'm probably going to hand over to Rob at this point, because Rob has been working in that field for ages. And very cheekily, at less than 24 hours notice, I asked Rob to knock something together for us that was social housing related. So Rob, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, James. Yeah, so I'm Rob Pickering. I've worked in computers for probably at least as long as James. So while James was playing with ZX Spectrums, I was probably playing with even earlier computers. And I've been a software developer, tech industry CEO in the communications industry, building voice systems, sort of semi-retired from that, but I've found myself in a new AI-based voice company, which I founded a little while ago. And I've been looking at some of the possibilities of AI. So James and I were having a coffee last week, and James told me about this podcast he was coming on, and said, you know, do you think we could sort of scaffold something out in our space? And he described a repair application that runs on the tablet. And the way that seems to work is that obviously a tenant goes to the repair application. James will probably now wave it around and goes through basically a set of buttons that allow them to sort of trigger a repair. So it asks a bunch of questions. They hit an icon that corresponds to a particular problem, and it goes all the way down into this sort of decision tree where it will ask a set of questions and get some answers. And then at the end of it, when the application's determined what they're trying to report, presumably triggers some sort of back end system to send someone around to action that. And I said, oh, that's quite neat. We could probably do something like that over the telephone on a voice application. Have you got any kind of data behind how that decision tree works? And he went off to go and grab that, and I sort of thought not a great deal more about it. And then late on Friday, this great big, 79,000 line file came through from the back end systems of that represented every possible part of that decision tree, everything that a user could request repair wise, and all the questions it goes through. So, things like, my fuse box keeps tripping out. Was it just after you plug something in? Can you unplug it? All of those things. So what I did was just spent a few hours really over the weekend, early on Monday, building something in this little playground that my current company has. So what I'm going to do is just share that. And here we go with that. So I have this little application just lets me basically play with different sets of data going into an AI. I chunked up the data James gave me about this whole sort of repair decision tree, combined it with a prompt to an AI, and the particular AI we're using here actually is the same one used in ChatGPT, but we can choose other ones. And I let it loose on a telephone call to be a repair agent, basically. And this is the sort of the result of that process.
Calling the repair line. I'm an automated agent designed to allow you to report your repair issue quickly when all the human agents are busy. If you wouldn't mind answering a few of my questions, I'll do my best to take your report right away. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay, but I'd actually prefer to speak to a human if I can, please.
Okay. I understand you'd prefer to speak to a human, but you might have to wait a queue. Talking to me should be quicker, and I'll try to make the process as simple as possible. If we try it and we don't get on, I can transfer you to the queue to speak to a human at any time. Shall we give it a go?
Yeah, go on, let's give it a go.
Okay. Great. Could you please describe the kind of repair issue you are having? If it's in a communal area, please mention that too. Here are some common issues. Water leak?
Yeah, the
Hot
issues
water.
with my gas fire, basically it lights, but then immediately, like right away, just goes out again. I'm really, really cold,
Okay.
and I'm wondering how quickly you can fix it.
So it seems like the issue is with your gas fire, where it lights but then immediately goes out again, right? I'll categorize this under heating, hot water and gas. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Is the problem with any of the following? Boiler, electric heater, gas fire, heated towel rail, radiator, shower? You don't know. It sounds like it might be the gas fire, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. What is the problem with your gas fire? Gas but won't ignite. No gas. Gas ignites but won't stay lit. Not working. Something else. It sounds like gas ignites but won't stay lit might be the issue, right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's exactly my issue.
Okay. Thank you for your report. The issue with your gas fire where it ignites but won't stay lit has been logged. Someone will be looking into it, and I hope it gets sorted out quickly so you can stay warm and comfortable. Is there any other issue you would like to discuss?
Can you give me any idea how quickly they're going to be out to do that? Because it's really, really cold, and I've got no other heating in the house, so I'm really quite cold. Can you give me any estimate?
I understand how uncomfortable and concerning it can be to be without heating, especially in this cold weather. Unfortunately, I can't provide an exact time frame for when someone will be out to fix the issue. However, if you feel that this is impacting your health or safety, I strongly recommend calling our emergency assistance line for immediate help. Is there anything else I can assist you with?
Yeah, there is a much less pressing issue that seems I've got you on the phone and this seems to be working. There seems to be a problem in the communal area in the lift. There's a load of litter in and around the lift. Is that something you can get sorted?
Okay. All right, let's get that sorted. It sounds like the issue is in a communal area with litter.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it there, but you got the general picture of how that operated. Now, what I'm going to stress with that is that that was just taking effectively a decision tree that was designed for a computer application that had, I think, 6 or 12 buttons or something on a screen, and stepped through them one at a time and used it as the input to a large language model. So all I did was took that decision tree, put a little application interface onto it, so like an API that you've probably got in the back-end systems that you use, and then I told a large language model to go and use that to answer customer queries. And because of the way that's structured and the amount of time we had available, I literally probably spent no more than about 4 or 5 hours in total on building that whole application, just from a set of data that gives information on the kind of things that back-end systems talk to. We ended up with something that sounds a little bit like calling into an offshore call center who are reading stuff off screen and typing the results in. We can do far more convincing things than that with a little bit bit of time to restructure that data and those interfaces to use large language models and AIs for the things that they're quite useful at. And the things that they're very good at are looking at voice, looking at these kind of messy human expressions and condensing that and trying to match that up to computer data and then acting on it. So that as a model for how to build applications, whilst it's, you know, very, very quick and not perfect, it does illustrate the model of using the large language model to listen to what a human being is saying in our kind of slightly ambiguous, slightly messy language.
This episode of the Social Housing Roundtable is sponsored by Alertacall. Alertacall helps as many people as possible feel safe, connected and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. Alertacall's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Calls, an easier, simpler and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare and smoke alarms. Alertacall works with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and landlords. In 2022, Alertacall won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023 won Housing Supplier of the Year. I'm delighted to have them as our sponsor of the Social Housing Roundtable throughout 2024.
Converting that to a known set of possibilities and then actioning that, but then giving feedback. And you saw there was a little safety piece there on responding in an appropriate way. And actually, you know, if we were actually building this thing out as a decent, safe repair app in that environment, then we would do something quite different there, and we would embed into the data a level of urgency on each of the requests and some feedback to the tenant in the meantime about what they should do. But that's a sort of 30,000 foot view on a kind of an application and an area that AI can kind of be quite safely used for. So you know, that's basically what I sort of came along to say. But I think maybe now is a time to sort of throw the whole thing out for some questions, right now.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you both for some insight. And I mean, the chat has been really kind of popping off with a number of different discussion points. So especially to those who are new with the roundtable, if you'd like to come in at any point, please, there's a reaction tab at the bottom of your screen. Just click on raise hand and I'll absolutely bring you in. I'm going to go through a couple of points in the chat, but do please come in. We'd love to hear from you. A couple of people remembered your old games, James, which was lovely from the beginning of the chat today. James Hennigan is with us. He said that actually he uses OK Each Day every day. Very efficient carrying service, supportive and friendly staff. He used to play Ant-Attack on nights, which is lovely to hear. And I guess the first question that came through, which was from Nick Goodrich. So the ideas of AI and machine learning are great, but how do we manage any ethical or data privacy issues? And this seems to be something that's come up a lot in the chat today, is around data, use of data, getting rid of data, people opting out of AI and everything to do with that. I know, Rob, you'd said there, super question. I hope we go there in the discussion. So I don't mind whether you or James would like to dive in first on this, but it seems to be certainly one of the big talking points in the chat.
Okay, I'll try and answer that. So it's such a big question. We'll just try and divvy it down into one or two smaller pieces. So how do we use the data which is generated by AI? So the data which is generated off the back of, for example, the conversation that Rob just had with the AI is all stored in data stores and databases in the same way that your data is currently held. You know, so you have the capability of controlling where that data is stored, where the output is, who has access to it. So I think that's the first point. The AI isn't not yet anyway, not some sentient being that we're going off and chatting with that is secretly hoarding all your data. So you control to some extent where your data resides and how it is accessed. Rob, you've probably got a more holistic kind of view of all that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, The data privacy and the data. I mean, there are two things there. There's data privacy and there's data harm, and effectively one of the big issues is when we take customer data and we push it out into big large language models that are running in other regimes that have different data privacy, and that or into large organizations that, whilst they operate under GDPR and under our privacy regime, don't necessarily honor that in the way that maybe they should. And that absolutely is an issue with AI. And you'll notice in that demo that I did, I was using the term OpenAI technology that ChatGPT uses. There are many other ways of running models. There are open source models that you can run on local hardware, that you can run on UK cloud providers that are entirely within your sovereignty. So those kind of data issues can be controlled in that way. And yeah, absolutely. I think there are issues that need to be covered there. And just punting it all into a big cloud provider. The other issue is around their using that data to train their AI. And that's very much a grey area in GDPR. The data disappears at the point where it goes into the AI. But then again, the knowledge about how to reconstruct that data doesn't. So, there's no copy of that data in there, but there's a plausible deniability around then producing some data that looks like it. And my take is there are huge issues on using data to train AIs that you then use in a different environment. So this whole idea of using AIs that are controlled by other people is certainly one that needs looking at in any AI deployment plan for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a totally legitimate concern, isn't it? If you're fundamentally using third parties to deliver your AIs, then as you would working with any other third party, you have to have a really good understanding of what they're going to do with that data. But as time marches forward, increasingly people with those concerns, if you have those concerns, you have to have some faith that the sector's going to address those concerns by, as Rob alluded to, allowing you to run AIs more locally, or where these concerns have been addressed fully. But it's complicated because it's emergent technology.
It is. I'm going to bring in Clegg, so I want to make sure we're hearing from. We've only got 20 minutes in terms of the thing, but this is the thing. I think because it's emerging. I think someone mentioned earlier, it might have been Lara actually, said something along the lines of, I'm going to find it. I remember how apprehensive my office colleagues were when computers were first introduced. We were worried about cancer and everything. They were going to take over our jobs. And then you just learn it's a tool. And I think this is the thing, isn't it? We're still at that very early emergence of this, and at which way it's shaped, we have to be at the forefront of, because else it will get away from us. But Claire, I'm going to bring you in. It's lovely to have you with us today.
Yeah, thank you. It's good that you just said that, because that's exactly what I was going to say. I think I am at that stage where it makes me feel very nervous. And I put in the comments, it makes me feel sad when we use AI for things that humans should be doing, such as creative things and writing songs and drawing pictures and that kind of thing. I've come today because of my cynicism, and I was very impressed by some of the things that you said that it could do that humans perhaps can't do, or can't do very well or very efficiently. I have in my head that it's all going to end up like the Matrix, and I just wondered what reassurance, besides data protection, because I think you've sort of talked about that a bit, what reassurance you offer to people who are a little bit caught up with Keanu Reeves.
Shall I dive in on this, James? Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So, I mean, I think the whole point, AI has only got as much agency as we give it. And it can only generate outcomes that we allow it to generate. So if we connect AIs up to, nuclear buttons or whatever, then yeah, absolutely, there are outcomes we can generate. So really, this whole thing is about what we allow the AI to do, and we have ultimate control of that. And we, as this group of people in this room, because you are probably going to be making decisions about deployment of AIs at some point as a group of people. If you're in management in any organization, you're going to be making decisions about whether you're going to use an AI to further the aims of that organization organization, whether you can afford to actually not do that because of the ability to reduce costs and do things at scale that you can't otherwise do without it. But obviously a big part of that equation is also looking at all the possible harms out of the agency you give it. And particularly if we as a group of people, as technologists, as managers, as leaders, choose to give AI agency over people's lives without any checks, balances and controls, then we're doing the wrong thing. There's already a bunch of stuff in GDPR about having the right to have a decision explained. And if you implement an AI which makes a decision that fundamentally affects somebody, and you don't have management systems that allow you to say why that decision was made in that way, then you've got both a huge moral and legal problem with doing that. What it does allow you to do is to say, these are the range of possible outcomes, these are the range of data inputs. There are 10,000 cases of this across my organization. I want you to help me make a judgment on that, but you've got to be prepared to dive into those and explain why that judgment was made in each and every case, if you're required to do so. And indeed, kind of sample that to make sure the right judgments are being made. So, my take on AI being scary is AI is going to be just as scary as we allow it to be. And I suspect all the people around.
It's pretty scary, isn't it? Because humans are pretty scary.
Yeah, it absolutely is. But I suspect all the people around this table are likely to be highly responsible with that. And, it's not just a question of future harms. If you look at the way that AI is already used inside things like Facebook and social media, to show you things that cause engagement and benefit that platform, there are already a whole set of harms happening there. But you're not looking at them in terms of benevolent AIs, shooting people or whatever.
I think what's really interesting with that, though, is there's been a huge outcry, haven't there, this week, because Meta, who own Instagram, Facebook, have come out and said, well, we're going to use pictures for our AI delivery, and everyone's just gone, well, I don't want that. So lots of people pulling away. So we're still, it comes back to a point, and actually Steve McKenzie's coming in next, which is, Steve had said earlier, how are we to know the software is learning correctly to make a decision and not making a mistake, which may have consequences on further learning? And it pointed into Nick Goodrich, who talked about quality assurance. And there was a point from Michelle, who said there was a couple of research papers that came out earlier this year stating that the increased use of AI is associated with lower levels of critical thinking, high levels of procrastination. I guess that's another interesting debate. But Steve, I'm going to bring you in first, just to kind of highlight some of the points you'd like to raise today. So over to you. Good to have you with us today.
Hi, thanks, Matt. My concern with these chatbots is, how does it deal with people with hearing issues, eyesight issues, learning disabilities, English as a second language, or even regional accents and terminologies around the country? I mean, what one person says in one part of the country may be something different in another part. Only subtly, I agree. But if these are automated responses, again, going back to the point Matt just made, are they going to be making the right decision on the answers they give? Which, I mean, if you're driving a car, you know the direction to go. If you deviate from that direction, that can have massive consequences on the journey time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think with that, again, it's about using it in applications where you're constraining the outcomes to be fundamentally safe, and using it in a way where you're training it that if there's any ambiguity or the user is not entering a happy path, you push them out to a real agent. And that allows you to leverage your real agents in a much more effective way, right? So, if you're taking 50 concurrent calls and I know this is probably beyond the scale of a lot of folks here, but if you're operating a large call center and you're taking 50 concurrent calls and you have 5 really good empowered agents who have a track record of being able to sort customer problems out and actually you're taking 40 of those really simple systematic calls away, and putting them into an AI which is able to generate perfectly good results for those inquiries. But the moment you're getting a hint of the user not being in the happy path, and you're training the AI that the user isn't in a happy path, you punt it out to one of your 10 top call center people who you know is going to be able to sort that issue out. Then you're generating a net better customer service solution than leaving, kind of all 40 of them in a queue for an hour so that a lot of them time out and go away. And talking to the, absolutely the profound issues of people with language problems and learning difficulties. Well, AIs allow you to operate a multilingual call center, for example, without having to hire multilingual call center agents for anything other than those most difficult queries. And what they are probably at least as good at even now, and will only get better, is recognizing all the thousands of synonyms in regional dialects, because they're already trained on that kind of data. So you may well find that an AI is better at recognizing, the 20 different words in the UK for a sandwich than someone that you hired into your call center in Essex or Teesside.
But a real person, if they're not sure, they can ask a question. I'm sorry, what do you mean by Sani?
Yeah.
And if that synonym is not in the database, I mean, I'm just concerned because at the end of the day, years ago when I first started using computers, I was warned by somebody, be careful, because it's always going to be human input, rubbish in, rubbish out. So even before you start to use it, you've got to make sure you cover every single database, every single alternative, to make sure that the outcome is the correct one. If not, it can be a dangerous, dangerous thing.
I think what's clear is it needs to be a blend of both. I'm going to bring you in a second, James, but yeah, it needs to be a blend of both. I think AI is there, and I think this is the point, and the point of today is that it's there to help shape the customer journey, but not overtake it. And it needs to be a blend of both, else this is never going to work. James Hannon, I'm going to bring you in, and then I'm going to Michelle, and then back to James Batchelor, who I know had a couple of points to raise on some of the points we just got. So James, I'm going to bring you in. You're on mute at the moment, my friend.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everybody. Interesting discussion. Having done recently quite a bit of these webinars, one of the things that's coming up that's not being mentioned is in terms of the housing sector itself, in using this information, when you have staff who use various software in trying to cross-reference software between different departments for the journey of complaints, for instance, and then the person leaves the organisation and they say, oh, well, when they go, we'll get whatever computer equipment they've had, be it a laptop or whatever, and we'll clean it. But the one thing they hadn't taken into consideration is when a person leaves the organisation, it may be tenants who are involved, and they've been given, laptops, tablets, whatever else, and they haven't bothered cleaning them. So all that information leaves them open to cyber attack on leaving. Isn't this something that also needs to be addressed with the AI? Probably the question would go to Rob and James, both.
Don't mind who'd like to dive in on that one before we go to Michelle?
Yeah, James, so where are you thinking fundamentally the issue would be? Are you thinking that AI could generate additional data that then needs to be controlled and looked
Well,
at?
I'm thinking the software's put into place, isn't it? So companies will come to you, say, the specific type of software that they want. That could be to cross communication between different members within the organization, CEOs from Leeds down the way, right across. So all that information's there, but it leaves it open for then when people say leave and take the computer they've got with them, the laptop, or the tablet or whatever it might be, that leaves it open for that to be accessorized by other outside phishing and people like that, People are looking to infiltrate the organization, and the money now it's cost in the sector in terms of hacking.
Yeah.
Via the software.
I think I'm not sure if this answers your question, but most of the interactions with AIs in the ways that we've discussed today, those interactions are held, I think, what's the best terminology, centrally. the interactions are not held on the devices. So the devices are merely a portal, a window into a centralized AI. So actually, that's the way the world is generally moving anyway. As things become more and more cloud-based, there's less and less data on people's individual devices. So I think it's a very legitimate question, but the answer of which goes back to the earlier one, which is more generally what are the protections around data, I think. So I think, for example, imagine Rob's AI handling a repairs call through a device or on a telephone call. That device is unlikely to be storing any of the outcomes. It is the central AI and the central databases that will be storing them.
Yeah, I understand that. My brother-in-law helps to design cloud. He has Aruba, Aruba Technologist in America. So I'm aware of that bit. No, what I was on about is when I've done the CIH various webinars, they're talking about the accessibility of how open you become with your information on your websites and that, and how it can be hacked in terms of AI. That's all it was, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is one additional danger with AI here. So if we use something like that repair app as an example, obviously there is a customer harm that could come out of their entire repair history being found out by a bad actor, or being, collected in aggregate if they have a history of, I have no idea what, but there are certainly customer harms that could occur as a result of a client's entire repair history being divulged, especially if it includes things like addresses and all of that kind of thing. But all of that stuff is there already with all of the existing technologies. With the app, it's there because it's captured into a database. With an in-house call center operating that, it's there because that data is going into an internal database or an internal ticketing system. With an outsourced call center, it's even worse because it's going halfway across the world and potentially being captured. But assuming we're controlling those in the same way or a better way, which in some ways can be easier because all of this is living on one back-end computer system rather than dotted all over the world potentially, where you're collecting all of this tenant data, there's just one additional risk. And that additional risk is that conversation data is going off to a cloud AI provider who aren't getting involved in interpreting it. They're just giving the answer back in terms of a call that goes into a database. But they could be collecting and aggregating that, and it certainly could be an attack point. And there are extra defenses that are needed around that. So yeah, I think all your comments are valid, and they're real things that any IT project has to cover off. But few of those risks are brand new to AI. They already exist in existing systems.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Rob. Michelle, I'm going to bring you in.
Yeah, I'll try and make this quick due to time.
All good.
But yeah, I mean, we do have, as humans, over 150 cognitive biases. I think the data points that you showed, James, on that slide where you're collecting when people are actually, making contact, we have had an unwelcome spotlight on the social housing sector, and could AI resolve some of these issues? And people going, right, the rent hasn't been paid, or what's going on here? We haven't heard from them. But I think when we talk in AI, I think we need to be careful about the language we're using around it. It doesn't learn; it's an algorithm. And somebody mentioned earlier about it, it's the data that's going in. So as humans, we have this knowledge from lived experience. AI doesn't have that. It just has this information, the language we've actually given it. And that's actually a language of persuasion, whether it's ethos, Lagos, and, the feedback where it writes out to you. It's in persuasion. It's not self-regulating. It can't turn around and go, oh, actually, I didn't see it from that angle. I might have made a mistake there. And I think that's what we've got to be careful of, is we actually don't cross-reference ChatGPT as much as we do Google searches. And perhaps we should sometimes question, are we doing that? Should we be doing it more? And there's a terminology called anthropomorphism or something like that. And there's actually more papers being written on how to make AI more human than papers that say not to. So I'm just, you know, I'm one of these. I can see the benefit of it, but I can also see the dangers, and I think we've seen that in some of the comments. But your data entry, brilliant, love it.
I completely agree. I mean, the point is saving time. And actually, I'm going to bring in Dave because we've only got about 5 minutes left. But I thoroughly the point that stuck with me, Michelle, was really interesting. Is does it learn? And I think that's almost the argument of whether or not that classifies artificial intelligence or not. If it can or if it can't. I know that's a whole piece. But Dave, I'm going to bring you in, and then I'm going to go to Rob and James to reflect on Michelle and your points and wrap up. So, Dave, over to you. You're still on mute at the moment. I'd love AI to be able to say that if I say you're on mute, that someone can unmute. There
Yeah,
we go.
I clicked it a few times, it wasn't working. But those of you who know me know I'm a big believer in the sector of technology for good, and I want to focus a little bit away from the communication side, the customer service side, chatbots, and move to the underlying technology, which is probably even more important than everyone getting pissed off. Sorry, but I keep swearing. I know I do that in your sessions. But the problem being is that we all get frustrated with phoning or getting onto a chatbot. Put that to the side for a second and think of all the benefits of things like there's some great sites. I'll put it in the chat before I leave about AI for good. There's a thing called Claire, if anyone's seen that. It's about a European initiative about AI for good. Now think of healthcare, think of suicide prevention, think of welfare, think of rent arrears, think of all of those things that can be used. And yes, the algorithms, and you've got some people on the call, you've got Alertacall, you've got Patrick Brady there that are technologists that have applied technology and artificial intelligence. Please don't assume that artificial intelligence is all about chatbots. That's one tiny, tiny bit of it. What's underneath all of that is some clever technology that can be done for good. Claire mentioned earlier, I think it was Claire, wasn't it, about being in the Matrix? Claire, I don't want to break it to you, but we're already in the Matrix, my dear. So
that ship has sailed.
Yeah, I've been living in the Matrix for years, but that's just because I'm a technology geek. So I just wanted to make folk aware that the area of artificial intelligence and social housing can be so much bigger than a chatbot. That's me, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll pass back to Rob and James to share thoughts on both Dave and Michelle's points, and also to wrap up. So, James, I'll go to you first.
Well, on the point about whether AIs can be self-learning, I hate to break it to you all, but they really can. So there's several fields of AI research where the AIs are learning and acquiring new information novelly on their own accord. So that kind of stuff is happening. We didn't really have time to get into it today because, as Dave kind of mentioned, we've been focused on the applications that are most useful for social housing. But my final kind of comment really around the dangers of it is are we all clear where the Nobel Peace Prize came from? So Alfred Nobel invented dynamite, right? I mean, that is where the Peace Prize came from. When we invent things and create things like this, they are tools that could be used at the whims of humans for good. And dynamite revolutionized quarrying and blasting and the Industrial Revolution in some dimensions in many, many respects. But also dynamite was the inflection point for creating a whole wave of other explosives, which had a negative impact on the world. AI is exactly the same. It is a tool. We have to have a responsible approach to it. And some of the things that you'll read in the press around it being regulated and governments getting in on that, I think are all really healthy things, because it is out, it is out there in the wild, it is out of the box. The development of AI is only going to continue unabated, and we're all just going to have to get used to it in our lives. Rob?
Yeah, I think that's spot on, James. It's really, really good being part of forums like this, because I think, we've all got to make decisions about how we're going to deploy AI in our own individual lives and inside our organizations, and understanding what it can do, what the potential harms are, but also what the potential benefits are is kind of key to that process. So, kind of hopefully this has helped just, one tiny bit for a few folks. But it's been really enjoyable talking to you all and listening to all the different perspectives.
Thank you both. Thank you both for today. I think there's an awful lot of discussion that's gone off in the chat alongside this as well. So I'm hoping people have got kind of a lot of resolution and help. And even if it's kind of your first time to engage in a conversation on AI, I hope you found it useful. So a big thank you to James and to Rob for coming today. Big thank you to Alertacall for sponsoring today's session. Next week, we're taking a very different stance. We're going to be looking at trauma in social housing and stigma in other parts. So more details on that tomorrow. But for now, a big thank you to James and to Rob, and I look forward to seeing you all at a future event. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.